All right. So welcome yet another Deis public planning meeting. Gabe usually leads these, but he's got a crappy connection over at Google today, and Chris has a sore throat. So I'm Matt Boersma, one of the team leads. And the general idea here, I'm going to go over the plans for version 1 LTS, and then we're going to talk about what's going on with Deis version 2, and then hopefully we might have a little demo at the end. And feel free to interrupt at any point. We don't have a really strict agenda, so if something comes up, feel free to just jump in and interrupt. So good news from the last month or two. Docker D-Day happened, and the world did not end, at least as far as we can tell. That tells me most of our Deis version 1 users are pretty clued in. We saw a couple reports of problems and a couple people who weren't aware that things were going to stop working or using older versions of Deis, but by and large, I think everybody got through unscathed, so that's good. And obviously, if you're using Deis version 1.12, you should be essentially future-proofed, and we don't anticipate any other, unless Docker decides to come up with a v3 API for the registry. You should be safe. So then the slightly bad news, we were planning to have a version 1.13, our monthly release this Tuesday. That didn't happen for good and bad reasons. A lot of it is resourcing. Obviously, things are hard to push on in the month of December. Also, there just straight up weren't that many relevant changes to put in. So we're going to take the version 1.13 release and retarget it for February 2nd, which will be our next Tuesday window. And that is intended to be our LTS release, which means essentially we don't plan on doing new features for Deis version 1 after that, but we do plan on supporting that on into the future and backporting fixes. We've already done a couple isolated back fixes from the work that we've done on version 2. So LTS is still in the planning. We got a lot of feedback from the community, which is great, on what bug fixes absolutely have to go in there for it to be usable for people for the future. And we've also taken everything suggested in the meta issue, which is Deis 4776, and attach those to a milestone. So if there are other things you're thinking of that, gosh, if that doesn't get into this LTS, then we're really not going to be able to use it in the future, go ahead and comment in there, add a new issue, make sure it shows up in 4776, because that's essentially what we're using to scope out the work for the LTS release. And if you do have something like that in mind, do it soon, because basically we're at the point where we're figuring out which of us are going to peel off of Deis version 2 work and make sure that we have a version 1 LTS release. So there's that issue 4776, but more specifically what defines the scope of work is there's a V113 milestone. And Chris posted a link to it. Thanks very much. There's a V113 LTS milestone in the Deis project, and anything that's been tagged that way is something we're going to address before the next release. Any questions about Deis version 1 and the LTS? Okay, next up, Jason's going to talk about Deis version 2 development and the alpha and upcoming beta.
Hey, everybody. Just before the new year, we went ahead and cut a release of Deis v2 alpha. Sent out a notification to Deis users mailing list with a summary of a lot of changes, some project structure stuff that's different with v2, and that's all cut and ready to go. Aaron's actually going to demo that a little bit later. So if you are playing with and experimenting with Deis v2 alpha, we have created a meta issue 4827 under Deis. File an issue and reference that ticket there so we can kind of keep everything together and organized. So love your thoughts. Most of the load-bearing walls are there. Most of the pieces are there, which brings us to what we're working on for beta. So this is a GitHub issue under Deis of 4809. And really the focus of beta is going to be stabilizing the backing services, making sure that we have availability and recoverability targets for each of the backing services. So that includes, failover, backup, restore, DR, as well as buttoning up all of our end-to-end testing infrastructure to make sure that, quality remains high. We'll also be exiting beta with a strong opinion on how we expect Kubernetes clusters to be configured for production use cases. So stay tuned for some of that. The team is currently developing V2 across a kind of panoply of various zero to Kubernetes solutions. So we've got Kube Solo from Remus, Microkube from Kent Ranker on the Deis team, and then we're using things like GKE from Google, Kubernetes or Kube AWS from CoreOS, as well as Kubernetes Upstream, the kubeup.sh solution. So we're really sort of testing all of the various Kubernetes implementations. And so far, it's really proving out the fact that Kubernetes offers a really great abstraction layer for the underlying implementation for us. Deis is working pretty seamlessly across all of those various incarnations of Kubernetes. So that's pretty exciting to see. As well, we've mentioned Helm before, but Helm is a package manager that we've created through the process of building Deis V2, which is a package manager for Kubernetes. So Aaron's also going to demonstrate that as well. It's inspired by Homebrew, and it's how you will install Deis V2 platform into a running Kubernetes cluster. So we've cut a couple of point releases for that as well. So take a look at the beta issue. Again, that's 4809. It goes into a little more detail about some of the attributes and properties of what we consider the beta release to hold. And I would love your thoughts and feedback on any specific issues there that you see sort of deploying Deis in your environment. That'd be great. That's pretty much all I have. Any questions? Text or otherwise? Feel free to throw them in and happy to answer them. Cool. And then I think with that, Aaron, if you are ready to rock and roll, you have the con.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So as Jason mentioned, I'm going to be going into a demo here. Put together a couple, kind of an overview of what I'm going to be doing so you can follow along there. With that, I'm going to start sharing my screen and hope for the best. There we go. Can everybody see that? Yeah? Okay. All right, so if you're following along, there's a couple of prerequisites here. None of these is huge, other than, of course, having Kubernetes installed. And like Jason said, we're going to be building on top of Kubernetes. I'm going to be just using Google Container Engine because it's one of my preferred ways to install it. You can see here there's some other stuff. There's Helm installed. I've got an alias there. I've got my Kubernetes CLI. On my side, what I'm going to be showing is just going to be assuming all this stuff is installed. So we'll start out here with installing the Deis cluster. So this is, again, using Helm like Jason mentioned. So I'm going to do a Helm repo add. I'm going to name the repo Deis. This is actually behind the scenes going to be going to git clone all of the manifests for the Deis platform. It's just basically a bunch of Kubernetes manifests that we're calling a chart. Helm fetch just moves it into my current working directory for Helm. This Helm install command is going to actually talk to Kubernetes and install all of the Deis components. So this is going to take a second. This is, again, going to Google Container Engine over the real internet. It'll be done installing in a second. There we go. Now we're going to look at what's been installed here. Again, I'm using this alias KD, which is an alias for kubecontrol with the namespace Deis. And it's important to remember when you're doing this install that the Deis chart installs all Deis components inside of that namespace. So if you ever find yourself doing like a kubecontrol get pods and you see nothing, not to worry, just remember to put in that Deis namespace. So you can see here, GKE has already downloaded all of the containers, all the images and launched all the containers. We can just go into the logs of one of them. Let's take the router as an example. You can see the router is up and running and started, and you could do the same thing for any of these other pods and see the logs and see that they're all up and running. Little note, if you do this on your own, it's normal in the alpha for some of these pods to come up with crash loop backoff, and they will be restarted. That's normal. They'll be restarted a couple times potentially, and then finally they'll succeed to come up. It doesn't happen as much on GKE or other cloud Kubernetes clusters as it does if you're going locally. So the final step for the installation is we're going to figure out how to talk to the Deis platform. All the communication with Alpha to talk to the Deis platform goes through the router. And you can see on GKE here, the Kubernetes manifest for the router service tells GKE to create a cloud load balancer. You can see it was created there on this bottom line. And the most important part here is the cloud load balancer, of course, gives us an ingress point. This is an IP that we get that we're going to use when we talk to our app and also when we use the Deis CLI in just 1 second. So I'm going to just keep that IP in an environment variable for now. And then we'll go on and we'll register our app. I actually just did this step prematurely. So we're going to start by registering the app using zip.io. Put in my username, put in a password. Hopefully I can type well and they match. Yep. Use my personal email because that's what matches my SSH key, which I'll get to in a second. I'm going to create a new app called My Test. And it's important to note here before I create it actually that I'm in this example Go repository. This is public, so you can go and download it or clone it. And what I'm going to be doing here in a second after I create the app is I'm going to be git pushing this repository. It's a build pack style, so we'll see in a second that the Deis platform is going to go ahead and go build this because it's a Go repository. So we'll go ahead and create the app. You can see here that it added a remote called Deis, and this is where I'm going to do the git push to. Right before I do the git push, as I said before, I'm going to add a key to the platform. And I'm going to just prevent a little issue. I'm going to prevent an issue here of the incorrect known host. That would have failed my git push. So here goes the git push. Add the new hosts to the known hosts. This is the normal uploading all the objects. And in a second, the build will actually begin. Hopefully. Or not. Let's give it one more second here, a couple more seconds. There we go. So what's happening behind the scenes here is the builder, the Deis builder component, accepted the code, and then it started up a new pod, which is the Deis slug builder pod, and that pod was producing all of this output. So it, as you can see, it detected the Go app. Between this step and this step, it downloaded the Go build pack. Then the build pack took over and it started checking the GoDeps file, installing Go, doing the build and all sorts of things like that. At this point, that pod has completed. And then at this point, this is the Deis builder component actually talking to the Deis workflow component and actually launching the app. So let's see what that looks like. So before we go there, you can look inside of our pod, or excuse me, inside of our namespace. There should actually be a pod there. Let's see what happens if we just curl first. There we go. So you can see this is the pod's name. Oh, this is what I did wrong. Wrong namespace. So there you go. There's the pod name. And when we did that curl, again, this is just returning the current pod name, the release number, and then this Deis is being read from an environment variable. We're going to scale up and see that Deis actually will add new pods. In this case, there's going to be 3 pods. So we'll go back here again. You can see now there's 3 pods, and we'll verify that by showing 3 curls. You can see each of the 3 curls actually hit a different pod. And of course, you could do this. You could scale up to 1 million if your cluster could handle that, and you would be served by 1 million different servers. So that's it for now. Of course, you're free to go in and use the Deis CLI. Almost everything else in Alpha works as expected. But again, you can look at that ticket that Jason mentioned that has the V2 Alpha deliverables and see what does and does not work. So if there's no questions, if there are questions, now's a great time to ask. Cool. All right. Well, feel free to put them in chat. I believe.
Sorry, this is Gabe here. Just a couple of things I wanted to point out. One of the reasons that we've taken our time with some of these components is we really wanted to do a good job of making the components sort of Kubernetes native. So for example, the way that the builder functions in V1 versus V2 is actually quite different. The builder in V2 is much more of a pipeline kicking off a series of pods, in a traditional sort of batch processing, model. There's some really great benefits to that. Not only is it just more sort of Kubernetes native, but it's also incredibly fast. We've done a lot and I think you can probably tell by looking at the demo here that the speed differences and usability has been greatly improved, and that's a great deal thanks to the work that the team's done on the port to Kubernetes.
Awesome. Nice demo. I've been working with the same stuff, but it's still pretty impressive to see that for me. So that's the whole planning meeting, but if anybody has any follow-up questions or anything, this would be a great time. There's something in chat. Perfect. Are we going to upload this demo video? Yes, we are. Seth, it'll take us a little bit. What we'll go ahead and post in the IRC channel, and then we'll update the document at our documentation site, the roadmap document, to reference the video. So it'll be up in a little bit.
As far as the timeline goes, the stable version is expected before the end of Q1. Though obviously a lot of that's going to depend on how beta progresses here. But we're optimistic that we can ship a stable before then.
Thanks, Lauren. Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, let's call it a meeting. We'll see you here again next month.